Hello and welcome to Framingham Now. I'm Jack Patrick Lewis, State Representative for the town of Ashland and one of the reps right here in Framingham. As many of you know, a couple months ago we lost one of Framingham's greatest advocates in Rep. Chris Walsh. Chris loved Framingham, he loved his job representing his constituents, and he's missed. And the efforts he worked on will not soon be forgotten. But his constituents need an advocate. They need somebody to represent them at the State House, and the race to continue the work he started is already underway here in Framingham. Today I'm continuing the conversations I've been having with the candidates running to continue Chris's work. Today, Mark Tilden. I welcome you to the show. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for having me, Jack.
So, folks out there are asking all of you the same question. Why are you running to be state rep?
Because I want what's best for the people, the voters of Framingham. I want better and greater economic development in Framingham. I want something to address in Framingham that I talked about last year, which were decaying and what I call zombie strip malls, which have done great damage to neighborhood over several years. I want to take greater steps to protect our immigrant community from the ICE enforcement agents, which unfortunately have invaded our streets and have tried to commandeer our law enforcement. And I want widespread opportunity for the people of Framingham.
One of the things that you'll be asked a lot on the campaign trail, I can promise you, and after you're elected, you'll hear from constituents about is taxes, especially income taxes. We currently have a flat tax, as you know, in Massachusetts when it comes to income taxes, but there's an effort underway to try to increase taxes on incomes over $1 million in order to bring in more funds for education and transportation. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I'm not crazy about setting aside a certain class of people for disparate treatment on income taxes. I think it promotes class warfare, and I think it's divisive, and I don't think it's very productive. I think whatever measure gets put in place, whether it's by the legislature or through referendum, the folks that are susceptible to that will figure out ways to avoid it. I think there are better ways to address issues of funding certain parts of the Commonwealth. But I don't think that's a very wise thing to do. I do anticipate, and I'm sure everybody does, that we can expect greater revenue growth from new industries, gaming, and cannabis use. And I don't think those are earmarked for any particular need in the Commonwealth, and there's no reason why we can't. However, but upping the brackets for folks that happen to earn a certain level, I just think is counterproductive and against what we strive for is equal treatment for everybody.
One of the things funded by tax dollars, though, is sort of a social safety net and supports with folks, for folks trying to make sure that their family's provided for. What are your thoughts about the Commonwealth's responsibility to provide that safety net and ensure that resources are available to folks who are looking for employment or looking for better employment, looking to take care of their children?
Well, we've got to make sure that folks that are, suffering financially, economically for one reason or another don't fall through the cracks. And the Commonwealth has a responsibility and a duty, and I think a moral obligation to, fund and maintain a strong social safety net for people. At the same time, promoting greater job growth and greater opportunity for folks that are struggling is something we can and should do. I think we need greater training, greater chances for education for folks that want to take the step up the ladder economically. And there's no reason that we can't continue to do this. And I think Massachusetts has generally led the way in that type of program.
One of the laws that went into effect a couple of weeks ago is Massachusetts Pay Equity Act, trying to bridge the gap between what the average woman makes versus what the average man makes. But even though it's Massachusetts and it's 2018, that gap for men and women or racial minorities and white folks is huge. And I'm curious what role you think the legislature should play, and if there is a role for the legislature to play in bridging that gap, what can be done?
Well, pay equity between the genders is important to me. I raised 2 daughters. I'm not about to ever condone any pay disparity for women in the workforce. And whether it's through the legislature or through the courts or through corporate responsibility, it's got to get done. And I think we're making strides towards that. Connected with that, of course, is family leave and maternity leave, so on and so forth, such that a woman who becomes a mom, especially for the first time, that decides to take care of their kid is doing as much for the economy as if she would be doing if she stayed in her job. She shouldn't get penalized. I think it's up to mainly for businesses to find ways to bridge those gaps because they need to attract good talent. It's a tight labor market, and it's an incentive for companies to come around to that. In terms of racial inequity, if it's ever attributed towards, any measure of discrimination, certainly that's going to get addressed seriously. But in terms of, minorities that are lagging behind, it's greater opportunities for them got to come in the way of training, education, job growth, so on and so forth. It's, again, in a tight labor market, which we're fortunate to have, and with some luck, it'll continue. Those sorts of problems generally work themselves out, and it's the best way because it's companies and employers reacting to the market. And to me, that's a more organic and natural way to do things rather than legislation imposed upon them.
Which will be hard if you're elected to resist the urge to legislate when you see there's a problem, but that'll be a bridge you'll have to cross.
If you're a small businessman, like I've been, and I'm also a landlord for small businessmen, you know what the pressures are. And so when you see a new regulation coming down, if for instance, it's barely even touches upon it, but I operate rental property in Sudbury. In Sudbury, they've banned bottled water, and why are you penalizing a small business owner who needs to make a profit every day? If I were talking to anyone who voted that in among the town meeting or whatever, the Board of Selectmen in Sudbury, I would have said, I'll tell you what, you want to pass that law, each of you cut your incomes by 10-20%, and just see what you're doing, so you understand what you're doing. But regulation on businesses is something that it's more paperwork to fill out, or more fees to pay, or what have you. It just gets in the way of keeping the business going.
So you won't be signing on to the water bottle ban legislation that's sometimes floated?
I would sign on to returnable bottles,
okay,
which was unfortunately soundly defeated by the industry, where the infrastructure's in place to return the cans of soda and our carbonated beverages. And they sold us on the idea that the recycling that we've got now is sufficient to address disposable bottles that somehow find their way onto the sidewalks and especially onto the playing fields. And visit a school playground after a weekend of kids soccer, and you'll see it was I'm sorry to get off topic.
That's all right, but let's continue that train of thought down to the environment. The legislature has set ambitious pollution reductions expectations or standards for 2030, 2040, 2050. What role would you play as a state rep to ensure that we meet those standards?
Well, I know we're aiming for sustainable energy resources, renewable energy resources, be it wind or solar, and certainly that's important. But that's not going to replace fossil fuels in our lifetime. I just don't think they are. We don't have nuclear anymore. Whether you're pro or con nuclear, it is a cleaner form of energy, but it's fraught with risk. So it's something that I'm never going to win. If I wanted nuclear, I wouldn't win that argument on it. I'm more or less against any new nuclear facilities. I know there's controversy over pipelines coming into, whether it's hydroelectric power or gas, greater gas supplies. I'm just afraid that in a bitterly cold winter, if the supplies run low and the price spikes high, I mean, you got to explain to the folks that are on, low incomes or struggling financially, or especially the seniors, why it's a good idea to ban, new supplies when they're paying, prices that are going through the roof. It's a tough call, but you got to think of those folks, and sometimes there's a sacrifice involved. So I'll be arguing a lot of things.
Okay,
come up.
Continuing that same train of thought, transportation. So many of your future constituents either sit on the pike in traffic for about 3 hours a day sometimes, or they take the commuter rail and feel like they're throwing the dice about, is this going to be a 2-hour commute or a 3-hour commute? Is it going to rain? Is it going to be too hot? Or they commute within the region or within the city, and they use regional transportation or their own car. And I'm curious what role you think a state rep should play in ensuring that there are diverse avenues for people to use, while also trying to get the commuter rail under reps.
On the commuter rail, I'll tell you, when a few years ago they switched from the company Mass Bay Commuter Rail, which I don't know if it was fully private company or quasi-public or what have you, to Keolis, it sparked my interest, because you want to see a private company come in and they're profit-driven, so you think they're going to put out a good product, and it was a disaster in their first year, in the horrible winter of 2014 to 2015. I wonder what the best management option is. It's frustrating, because I'm never, if something can get run privately without penalizing the public or shortchanging them at all, I'm all for that, simply because they've got a motive to perform well. And I just don't know what it is about this company Keolis, and I'm not going to accept their, rationale that it's, poor equipment they inherited, or faulty rails, or what have you. I think we've got to redouble our efforts to figure out a way to get management in there that can really run that. If whatever, if we were going to bite the bullet and pay higher taxes, and if the legislator determined that you're going to pay an extra 1% on top of the current rate of, was it 5.25%, I guess, and it would all go towards public transportation, I'd say I'm ready to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's year in and year out. I think it's you have to accept the fact that it's going to take a ton of money to bring the T system up to speed to what today's demands are, where you've got a high-tech economy, lots of jobs coming in, lots of folks abandoning their cars. But to keep it running at a level that's more like the 1980s or 1990s is a failure in the making. I think with the highway systems, we have the Mass Pike, and it's not about to expand anytime soon, so you've just got to get out of your car. I'll give whoever it is that deserves credit for taking away the tolls and putting in gantries. You go to other states, I mean, ours generally looks a lot better than other states. Drive through Connecticut, and it's perpetually under construction, so I say to the voters, it could be worse.
It could be worse. Oh, well, that's a great campaign slogan. I'll wait to see it on your side.
Vote for Mark Tilden. It could be worse.
I'll let you give it a try, and you can let me know if it works for my next campaign. Education, what could be done, what should be done to improve public education?
Well, I know that months ago a commission was formed, headed by Sonia Cheng Diaz. She's the state rep from Chelsea, I guess.
Senator, I think, but yeah. State senator from
State senator, okay. That came up with some pretty solid ideas. The budget that was just passed didn't entirely act upon them. Apparently, the funding formula didn't take into account rising insurance costs, so you had to pay for those, and you sacrificed other things. one of the things you got to look at is historically, good schools equate to the level of property taxes, which equates to the level of house values, which equates to the level of affluence in a certain town. If that's never going to change, we're never going to have true equity in our funding system for schools. So someone's got to pretty much upset the apple cart when it comes to school funding, at least on the local level. When you could have, the states funding it as fairly as ever could occur, but in the meantime, you're going to have some districts where the high schools have plenty of AP classes, which leads to, good college opportunities, and others that don't. You'll have some districts where the parents can afford, private tutors, and others that don't. You have some districts, like Framingham, which has a far greater share of kids from low-income households, not English language learners, kids with disabilities, kids that came over maybe from the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands or what have you, in the hurricanes. I've spoken to some folks on the school committee last year during my campaign, and I said to them, and they agreed, you're playing with a bad hand, and with all the problems you put up with, other towns, fortunately don't have that, so we shouldn't get penalized, and our schools shouldn't suffer for that.
Do you see yourself as somebody who would try to upset that apple cart? Is that the
Well,
imagery?
I'd raise the question. I mean, where is it engraved in stone that you've got to have property taxes fund the schools locally? Why would, how does Framingham ever have a chance against whether, Western or Wellesley? Forget about it. It's just never going to work. It's a tough question, but folks ought to at least allow it to come up in public discussion.
One of the other things the legislature has taken up this year is criminal justice reform. We've, in my opinion, made a couple huge steps forward, but there's still more to be done. Do you have thoughts or opinions on our current criminal justice system?
Well, I think they did a good thing by ridding themselves of a lot of the mandatory minimum sentences, which took away all flexibility of the courts and were just used as a playing card, a bargaining chip by prosecutors. I think the emphasis on treatment for drug crimes is important. Reforming the Corey statute is giving folks a chance who are getting out of the system and back into the mainstream of society. I know there's the SAFE, I forget what they're calling it, to bring someone in who presents a danger that may have firearms or something like that. Let me see. It was on your...
It's not on this list.
The extreme risk.
Extreme risk, yes.
The extreme risk protection order. Is that to commit somebody or to take away their firearms? I'm not sure.
The second piase.
It's to take away their
temporarily.
Firearms. It's probably a good idea. You do have too many threats of violence going on in households. It's just that working in the courts so long, where the restraining order type of cases spanned, an entire range from legitimate to strictly gaining leverage. So I have, I do favor this law, but those types of applications for, court orders to restrict rights, I always take a hard look at. But the whole Second Amendment craze is something that I've never really bought into. It's something that's in the Constitution. You can't touch part of the Constitution, but I think it was relevant back in the early 1800s when there were fears against a standing army. That when we first became a country, but that's no longer the case. So all the other amendments deal with people's rights. Whether it's religious rights or free speech, free press, those have evolved and those have remained relevant. But the right to bear arms is something that didn't need regulation back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, but now it does. But unfortunately, the Constitution just can't catch up with it necessarily and change itself. So Yeah, I mean, the gun rights lobby has always rankled me.
Well, you alluded to my questions for the lightning round, so why don't we pivot and go there? I sent them to all the candidates in advance so they had time to study, so you referenced it before. In life, very little of what we do can be summed up in a yes or no question. But at the end of the day, as a state rep, after all the compromising and after all of the amendments, you're presented with a bill and you have to vote yes, no, or you can take a walk down the hallway and just not be present for the vote and pretend that you were just called away for an important call. And, you would never do that, I'm sure. But a series of...
I may walk away on one of the questions.
There we go, yeah, and then maybe we have just enough time to come back to that
So yes,
one.
no comments?
Yes or no, and then at the end, if we have some time, you can try to resist the urge to comment if you do lightning strikes.
I'll do it afterwards. Fine.
If we have time, So if I ask a question like, do you like dogs?
I have a dog.
No, do you like dogs?
Do I like what?
Do you like dogs?
Yes.
Yes, okay, there we go. Do you like ice cream?
Yes.
Yes, okay, see, we did it.
You needed to test me on a yes-no question?
You answered, I have a dog, too.
But I didn't know you
like
were...
dogs. I was just practicing.
Let's just start.
Do you support requiring companies that receive tax credits to provide their employees a living wage and proper benefits?
No.
Do you support a single-payer healthcare insurance system?
Yes.
Do you, if invited by workers, would you join a picket line to support them in their strike?
Oh, yeah.
Do you support the president's initiative to ban immigrants from certain
Stop
countries?
there, no.
No, okay. Do you support a woman's right to choose?
Yes.
Do you support the death penalty?
Yes.
Do you support allowing citizens to register and to then vote on election day?
No.
Do you like that the legislature passed a $15 minimum wage, and would you have voted yes?
Yes.
The legislature recently banned conversion therapy for minors. Would you have voted yes?
I would vote yes on the ban.
Yes. The legislature also passed paid family medical leave. Would you have voted yes?
Yes.
We also passed an extreme risk protection order. Would you have voted yes?
I would have.
And do you support the Safe Communities Act?
Yes.
So you want to talk about at least one of them. Which one was it?
Well, the minimum wage, I would never look a struggling family in the eye and say, no, your work isn't valued. And, I don't think you should get $15 an hour for whether you're, a restaurant worker or a hospitality worker, hotel. But what I understand is that they did not include in that an exemption for teen employment, which I feel bad about because I think it's important for teenagers to get their first jobs, whether it's at the legislated minimum wage or not, so that they can learn the value of work, learn the value of what it takes to run a business, learn how to deal with authority aside from their parents or their coaches or their teacher, get some money in their pocket, learn the value of a dollar, which I don't think they're going to get. No matter what great summer programs that they're enrolled in. Everybody, I'm sure, remembers their first job that they got as a teenager. And some of the memories are good and some of the memories are bad, but I think everybody agrees that they learned something from them all. I had awful jobs when I was young. They were hard, they were dirty. I had nasty people that I had to work for. But, you got to live in the real world. And I think getting teens these jobs I wish the legislature had treated it as more of a priority. But otherwise, the $15 an hour wage is a good thing. I just hope it works, because what I've read is that in Seattle, where it's been in place for several years now, I'm reading, which I think are fairly good sources, that employers are just cutting hours back, which means fewer employees in the job, which means poorer service, which means the businesses suffer, which means maybe the businesses go out of business. So, sometimes there's a countermeasure that occurs, and it's frustrating because the work is valuable and the people that are doing it are valuable.
So last question, and I asked this question to you maybe a year or two ago, and it's not a yes or no question, so feel free to take a minute or so. But you're putting yourself out there to run for office, as you've done before, and in doing so, you sacrifice some things. You sacrifice months, years of your life. You sacrifice privacy, and that says something about you as a person, that you're willing to put put yourself out there, but I also think that it says something about the city of Framingham, and that this is a community that you're willing to work that hard for. And so in closing, what is it about Framingham that makes it the kind of community that you're willing to work so hard for?
Because it's, I think most of the people that live in Framingham love their town, but they know that it's a struggling community. And they know that there's lots of things that could improve. And that's one of the big reasons I think we, switched to a city and then elected a mayor. I can't, for the life of me, sit still and allow ICE agents to come and pluck, folks, moms and dads off the streets, especially where it's happening in courthouses lately, where you get, through my email listserv among the criminal defense attorneys, stories of someone who may have gotten picked up on a minor driving charge and had a date in court and walk out, and on the sidewalk they get cuffed by, the agents in their blue windbreakers with the yellow writing on them. And a lot of these folks, you don't see them again. What benefit do they bring to the community? Before ICE intruded in our lives, were we less safe? We had the police, but now they come in and commandeer our law enforcement. At our borders, we have two signs: keep out and help wanted. Mm-hmm. So we've forever, this country is ambivalent. Back in '06, remember when Kennedy and McCain, the heavyweights in the Senate came up with an immigration bill, bipartisan, but they were not, shot down before they could even put it to a vote. Mm-hmm. So when the Tea Partiers took over, that was it. Framingham has always, I think, remained true to their youth. They've kept faith with the kids. There are great sports programs. I think the schools are good. My kids went through them. I didn't put them through private school. They did just fine. I think the high school is very demanding, and turns out a lot of bright kids. And if you look, I think they publish a list of the colleges they go to. That, for me, that's one measure of success. And I think, the fact that we did spend the money about 15, 20 years ago through the debt exclusion has paid off. I think it's I think whoever does the rankings should make Framingham High School a high-ranking institution. Back to the strip malls again. Until you get rid of them, I'm not going to stop talking about it.
No, I heard about them a couple of years ago. One of them, but I saw bulldozers the other day, so I thought about our conversation.
Right, Mount Waite, mm-hmm. which was a commercial ghetto mm-hmm. for a while, just awful, a wasteland. Looked bombed out. I don't think any commercial could survive. I would agree with the owner and developer that housing is probably the only way to go. And I guess if he puts in a nice new restaurant, that got a favor from a lot of people to get it passed. But the way it's looked, you can't allow these places to continue. It just spreads. It's in Water Street. I read maybe less than a week ago that the owner there wants to put in housing, and guess what? He'll open a restaurant too. And if it were up to me, I'd say, no, that worked down at Mount Waite. You look 2 miles down the road at Pinefield. Mm-hmm. It seems to do okay. It's not much of a different type of area in terms of traffic. Mm-hmm. Fix it up, mister. I run a retail strip, not as big as yours. I know what the struggles are. But you got to make it look good if someone's going to invest their own money in a business. We don't need more housing there.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I wanted to thank you so much. That the half an hour always goes by so fast. For those watching at home, on Election Day, the Tuesday after Labor Day, September 4th, if you want to vote for Mark Tilden, you'll need to ask for a Democratic primary ballot, which you can do if you're unenrolled in a party and independent or are a Democrat. And on that ballot, as you go down the page, it'll say state representative, and there will be no names listed. You will need to fill in the oval next to the blank spot and then write Mark Tilden. And then whichever Democrat gets more write-in votes will go on to the general election in November. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us on the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great to see you. For those tuning in at home, I've interviewed all the candidates running for this seat, so watch their videos, Google them, look out your front window because they're probably coming up the door stoop to talk at you soon. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.